Hello everybody, and welcome to Extra Points, a production of Delphi Bracketology. I'm a faculty sponsor, Brian Tonsoni, and a fellow faculty sponsor, Dave Gilbert. We're here to bring you some monthly information about college football. We're also doing some writing on sportstalkwithtonsoni.com, and we're doing some podcasting weekly with our high school students in Delphi Bracketology. But Dave, this podcast, or this video, is about college football. What's
so far? Been watching. I watched Purdue. They've gotten off to a little bit of a rough start, but hopefully after a big win against Boston College just last weekend, they'll turn things around. Then just, there haven't been a lot of big games so far, but that'll be picking up now as we're getting into the conference part of the season. We'll start to see some big games. You got Ohio State and Penn State this weekend is a big game. So looking forward to the conference matchups.
And on my end, as an Indiana fan, they've gotten off to a pretty good start, 3-1, a little disappointing last weekend. The big item for me is that the best teams are still the best teams. It looks, like Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma are in line to make it to the tournament. But we're going to be evaluating that. We have a series of our students going to be doing a little bit of review. So let's get started, and I hope you enjoy the show.
And now we will have Jameson Connor with the Heisman update.
After a full slate of action in Week 4 college football, three quarterbacks continue to make the strongest cases for place in Heisman Trophy discussions. At number 1 is Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback from Alabama. Alabama is averaging nearly 54 points a game, and Tagovailoa is averaging 284 yards of total offense through 4 games. The Alabama offense unveiled yet another option for Tagovailoa against Texas A&M, getting tight ends Hale Hagentes and Irvin Smith Jr. involved down the middle of the field. Coming in at number 2 is Dwayne Haskins, quarterback from Ohio State. Haskins was nearly flawless in the win over Tulane, starting with 9 consecutive completions and finishing 21 of 24 for 304 yards and 5 touchdowns, all in the first half. The game felt like the perfect tune-up for Penn State and a showdown with its all-star quarterback, Trace McSorley. Will Grier, quarterback from West Virginia, holds the number 3 spot this week. Grier and wide receiver David Sills put on yet another show against Kansas State, connecting for 3 touchdowns as the Mountaineers touched K-State. Grier tied a career high with 5 touchdown throws, placing his Heisman campaign firmly back on track after Hurricane Florence wiped out West Virginia's game at NC State last weekend. Coming in at number 4 is quarterback Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. Oklahoma needed overtime to stave off Army in a game kept mostly out of Murray's hands. Army's offense had the ball for 44 minutes, 41 seconds of the game to OU's 15-19. In that time, though, Murray did complete 73.3% of his passes and accounted for 4 touchdowns. Rounding out the top 5 is Ed Oliver, defensive tackle for Houston. Oliver had 3 tackles in Houston's blowout win over Texas Southern.
Thanks, Jameson. Jameson can also be heard with his Heisman update at Sports Talk with Tonsoni, Sports Weekly update as well. So he does a really, really good job. We're going to move on to the Big Ten, and Dalton Jones has a report. Take it away, Dalton.
Dalton Jones here, and I'm here to tell you about the Big Ten after Week 4. It was another great week of college football for the Big Ten. It was the first week of conference play for most teams. We had only one non-conference loss. Rutgers lost to Buffalo 42-13. Ohio State is in the first in the East, and Wisconsin is in the first in the West. I think those teams are going to be battling each other for the Big Ten championship. I think Ohio State will eventually win it. The first outstanding player this week for the Big Ten is David Blau, quarterback from Purdue. He was 21 of 28 for 296 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns. He had a great game. The next outstanding player is Miles Sanders from Penn State University. He rushed 22 times for 200 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. The last outstanding player is Paris Campbell, wide receiver from Ohio State University. He had 8 receptions for 147 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. I think Penn State is going to have a great season, and so is Ohio State. I think ultimately Ohio State will again win the Big Ten championship. A couple games to look forward to. Number 4, Ohio State University at number 9, Penn State. Ohio State travels to Beaver Stadium to take on the Nittany Lions. Both teams have perfect records thus far, and both teams plan to keep it that way. It will be a close game, no doubt, but Ohio State will be upset by Penn State. I think it'll be definitely a close game. I think Penn State wins by at least 7 points. Number 14, Michigan at Northwestern. Michigan leaves Ann Arbor to take on the Northwestern Wildcats. Michigan comes into the game as the heavy favorite to win, but they better not sleep on Northwestern. I think this season in total is going to be great for the Big Ten. I expect us to be the top 2 or 3 conference in the NCAA. That's all for me.
Thanks, Dalton. We will now hear a report on the Big 12 from Elijah Hudson.
The Big 12 is looking like one of the paramount conferences in college football in the first 4 weeks. Let's dive into a detailed look at the teams that make up the Big 12. Let's start with West Virginia. They're standing at a record of 3-0. Quarterback Will Grier has a whopping 14 touchdowns already. It only took him 3 games to get 14 touchdowns. That speaks volumes to this team's potential. They have a for sure chance to reach a bowl this year. Next up, we have Baylor. They're currently standing at 3-1. Baylor is going to be one of those tough, non-ranked matchups for their opponents throughout the season. We'll see how they do this week against a very good Oklahoma team that is on fire. They have a good chance to make a bowl game this year. Texas Tech, they have a record of 3-1. The Red Raiders pulled off a big upset last week against Oklahoma State. Let's see if they can keep up their 43.7 points per game average as they face more quality opponents. Now we have Iowa State. They're currently at a 1-2 record. The Cyclones' offense is created mainly from running back named David Montgomery. They need a more balanced offense if they're going to make it to a bowl game this year. So they got an okay chance to make a bowl game, but they really got to pull their team together if they're going to do so. Next, we have Oklahoma State. They have a record of 3-1, and the Cowboys look great against their lower tier opponents, but when they faced ranked opponents, it wasn't the same story. They have a fair chance to make it to a bowl game this year. So Kansas has a record of 2-2. They are a subpar team that has only played 3 non-talented teams, and they lost to one of them. So they lost to Baylor, which was expected. So unless if they can exceed expectations, I wouldn't be thinking that they're going to be doing too hot this year. They have an alright chance to make it to a bowl game. I wouldn't count on it though. Texas has a record of 3-1 at the moment. They earned themselves a reputation by beating USC and TSU, which nobody really expected. They are a team that can pull up more upsets, so definitely keep them on a radar. Don't sleep on them this year. They have a wonderful chance to make it to a bowl game with how hot they are right now. Kansas State has a record of 2-2. They've gotten smacked against both ranked teams that they have played this year. Nothing about their stats stand out, so they're just another team that's decent. They have a decent chance to make a bowl game because they're a decent team. Oklahoma has a record of 4-0, undefeated. Kyler Murray is putting on a show. He's putting his team on his back with over 1,000 yards passing and 11 touchdowns this year. With him leading their offense, they have an outstanding chance to make it to a bowl game. I would be disappointed if they didn't. Next up, I have Texas Christian. They are 2-2 so far. The Horned Frogs are a talented team that's having trouble pulling out wins. The talent is there, just not necessarily the chemistry. They have a fine chance to make a bowl game this year. And all in all, the Big 12 has a lot of well-rounded teams this year, so conference play could just take out a good team out of bowl contentions. Back to you guys.
Elijah does a great job for us, has been part of the group now for multiple years. We appreciate his reporting. The SEC with Evan Fritz is up next.
The SEC has been one of the most successful divisions at breeding players for both the NFL and producing teams for the college football playoff. This year, as always, the SEC is looking to be a straight powerhouse, with Alabama leading the charge. Quarterback Tagovailoa, or however you say his name, he's just really good at football. He's a Heisman hopeful. Players also that we want to look for: 1, Nick Fitzgerald with Mississippi State. Drew Lock, QB for Missouri, who holds the record for most touchdowns in the SEC. Jarrett Stidham, who is one of the more NFL-ready quarterbacks, who reigns from Auburn. And finally, DeAndre Swift, running back for Georgia, whose team is looking for the heavy run attack this year. Also, we're going to take a good look at some matchups. Starting on September 29th, we have Florida at Mississippi State. October 27th, we have Florida versus Georgia. And November 24th, we have Auburn Tigers at Alabama Crimson Tide. November 24th, the same day, we have LSU Tigers at Texas A&M Aggies. The real question is, how many of these teams will make it to the playoffs? That's the real question. Thanks for joining me. And back to you guys.
Thanks, guys. And now for the ACC preview, or write-up, we have Peyton Roth and Colt Spangler.
Thanks, Peyton, for those previews over the top teams of the ACC. To continue, the NC State Wolfpack have started their season 3-0 and have sadly compiled no big wins in those 3 games. Their biggest game of the season so far is coming this week when they'll play Virginia. They should be able to defend their home turf as they come out as a 5-point favorite in this matchup. Georgia Tech, who has had an all but good start to their season. The Yellow Jackets are 1-3 and lost games to South Florida, Pittsburgh, and Clemson. This week they'll match up against Bowling Green. They should win this game, but if they don't, we may be looking to see if the coaching is a problem. With that, we move on to Boston College. The Eagles started the season 3-0 until last week's loss to Purdue. Next week they'll be faced up against the Temple Owls. Should be an easy victory for the Eagles as Temple team is 2-2 with a loss to Villanova, and Villanova's team is not as good as their basketball team. Continuing, we have Pittsburgh Panthers, who are 2-2 with recently taking a loss against UNC. Their other loss came against Penn State, where they lost by 45 points. This upcoming week, they will have to face off against USC, who was undefeated last year and continue that this year. The USC Knights ranked 13 in college football rankings and most likely defeat the Panthers. Louisville finally, the last team we will be covering is the Louisville Cardinals. They are another 2-2 team that is coming off a disappointing loss. This loss came against Virginia, where they only put up a field goal. The Florida State Seminoles are the 5-point favorites in this conference matchup that they're facing next week. The ACC is shaping up to be an interesting conference. Who will come out on top? We are finding out all this as conference matchups begin weekly.
Excellent job, guys. Now we'd like to introduce to you some 6th grade middle school bracketologists joining us for the first year, and their first segment, tailgating tips. Here we go, guys.
Thanks, Mr. Tonsoni, and now we will get some tailgate tips.
Well, you tailgaters out there better start listening.
Our first tip is to make sure everyone knows which side you're on. For example, if you were rooting for Davidson, cover your tailgating vehicle with all the best merch.
So cover your vehicle with the team you like or the team you're rooting for.
Our second tip is delicious food. Pick a theme like Mexican or fish fry.
Change your menu each week. Have a weekly food sign up.
Our third tip is to bring the Dish tailgater and bring 2 flat screens for the ultimate tailgating experience.
This is so people not going into the game can enjoy on the TV in the comfort of the tailgating area.
Fourth down means fourth tip.
Bring something to play with, like a football, frisbee, or even cornhole.
Fifth tip is to fill your cooler with several different beverages. Gatorade, water for the kids, Capri Suns, and finally lots of different sodas.
Fill your cooler with color.
Moving on to the 6th tip. Arrive early to ensure your crew is at the same spot each game.
Those spots can get filled in a heartbeat.
An extra tip to go with that is put your parking pass, if you don't have one, hang it on your mirror.
Don't forget to put your tickets under the car visor.
That will wrap it up. There are all of your tailgating tips for the month.
This is
Lakin,
Keegan,
and Braden signing off. Back to you, Mr. Tonsoni.
All right, thanks for those tailgating tips from the youngsters there. Welcome to Bracketology, guys.
This segment is the Pac-12, and Austin Smith will bring us this information. Take it away, Austin.
Thanks, Mr. Tonsoni. Hello, this is Austin Smith. The Pac-12 is off to the races with 12 teams battling it out for a conference championship. But first, let's do who's hot and who's not in the Pac-12 after first 4 weeks of play. On one of the first teams that are off to a great start is the Stanford Cardinals. They're 4-0 overall and 2-0 in conference play. Another team is the Washington Huskies. The record is 3-0 overall and 2-0 in conference play. 3-1 overall and 2-1 in conference play. Who's not hot in the Pac-12? And they are UCLA and Oregon State. UCLA is 0-3, and they have not played a conference game. The other team is Oregon State. They're 1-3 overall, and they're 0-1 for conference play. Let's do some good players in the Pac-12. The one is Liam Murphy, that plays for Stanford. His pick gave the Cardinals the 38-31 comeback win in overtime over the Oregon Ducks Saturday. Another player is Washington's wide receiver, Ty Jones. His amazing catch in the first quarter Saturday versus Utah. Washington State's senior quarterback, Gardner Minshew, is 154 out of 217 in pass completions. He leads the Pac-12 in pass completed. J.J. Taylor, Arizona's sophomore, leads the Pac-12 with 477 rushing yards. Peyton Henry, a Washington Husky freshman kicker, made 6 out of 7 field goals this season so far. Back to you, Mr. Tonsoni.
Thanks, Austin.
Okay, that should do it for this week's Extra Points. Dave, again, some big games coming up, conference play happening. Anything that you see happening in college football that our listeners need to pay attention to?
Just paying attention to the conference races. Right now they're heating up. Like I mentioned previously, you get Ohio State, Penn State this weekend. That's the big matchup for this weekend. But every weekend there's going to be a big game. Basically the rest of the season. These are kind of winner go home situations for a lot of these teams. They can't afford losses.
I agree, Dave, wholeheartedly on the winner go home. I think Notre Dame Stanford this week is another example of that if anyone's going to break into those big four for the playoff, it's going to be a team like Notre Dame, a team like Stanford, but they have to go undefeated. And so someone's going to come out on top, someone's not. So that'll do it for this week's edition of Extra Points. Please follow us on YouTube for these videos. On any podcast source, look up Sports Talk with Tonsoni. Our young men are doing such an excellent job. We're even getting some credentials to college football games. And they're also writing up articles on the variety of sports at sportstalkwithtonsoni.com. So for Dave Gilbert, I'm Brian Tonsoni. Thanks for watching.